So do you hold to like logical positivism?
I don't know. I think so. I would say I'm a naturalist, so I would say
it fell out of favor pretty quick because it's self-defeating ultimately, and so that's why scientists steered away from it.
So then maybe that's not what I am, but I'm definitely. If your question is, am I a naturalist? Then the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Are you saying naturalism is self-defeating?
Well, I think that there's a significant problem with naturalism because, because there's. Well, first, let me have you do this. Let me have you define what you mean by naturalism, rather than me just kind of assume. I don't want to straw man your position.
Pretty much what I said before. Nature exists. Things that that I'm aware of outside of myself are natural, and unless they're artificial. In other words, they were man-made or created by an animal or something that has agency to create, the ability to create something. So if it's a created thing, I would call it artificial. If it's something that occurs in nature without, a mind and something with agency to do things, then I would say it's natural. Okay. So like a beaver dam would be artificial because it's constructed by a beaver, right? But a bunch of sticks that fell in a storm that blocked up a river would be natural, even though they're kind of doing the same thing.
And so that's, I guess I'm still struggling. I mean, I understand what you just said, but I'm still trying to understand your position. So you're trying to say that like only the physical exists? I
wouldn't reduce the natural only to the physical, because we have concepts that exist in the mind, mathematics and
logic,
pain, love. So these are
okay, good. We're on the same.
Yeah, like I have an imagination and I can imagine a bear, but there's no actual existing bear there in terms of the physical reality. But it is a manifestation of my mind, which seems to be the result of the neural activity in my brain. So ultimately, everything is reducible to the natural, even if it's kind of like emergent properties, right? So I do think that there are emergent properties which are non-physical, but ultimately they're reducible to the natural.
Yeah, I would agree with you, probably like all the way up to like the very, very, very end when you said that it could all be reduced to the natural. I would be with you all the way right up until the end there. Because but I don't.
One of the reasons is because you're presupposing the supernatural, right? And that's probably where the divide is, because I don't have a reason to add that in.
Well, here's the problem though. If we take it all the way, if we say that ultimately it ends at it ends at the natural, then we really are having to reject everything else that we just said, and that's where I would pull back and say, there's got to be a disconnect, because if it all comes down to brain chemicals, then there's really no way that we could know anything.
It probably depends on what your definition is of knowing, but I think that we can be reasonably convinced of things. For example, I know that I exist, right? That one's pretty easy because I'm a thinking agent. Excuse me. So going back to Descartes, I think, therefore I am. If there is an agent there to do thinking, then it exists just by the virtue of the fact that it's doing something. So the fact that I'm having an experience is proof of my own existence. Now, there are other things that I presuppose on top of that, like your existence, right? Because I don't have your existence. I only have my experience telling me that you exist. But so that's a little bit of a presupposition, but it's a necessary one, right? We don't have a way to get around that, right? The problem of other minds. That's just something that we all kind of take for granted, right? So when it comes to necessary presuppositions like that, we're stuck. But when we start trying to get to like the supernatural, that's not a necessary presupposition for me. That seems like adding something because we don't know. It's kind of like the God of the gaps argument.
We
don't understand where the universe came from, therefore supernatural. And I'm like, that's a fallacy, right? That's an argument from incredulity. So that
I could see how you came how you would come to that conclusion. For me, I don't see. I mean, I don't say, well, I don't know, so it must be God, because I would agree that's a really bad way to think. And I realize that there are some Christians out there who say really bad things, and we all cringe a little bit, but it's okay.
I'm actually going to get to two questions because we just got a question from the chat. Okay. This one's longer, and then I'll get to my final question. But this is the broader question from Jason. Wants to know, is scientific consensus a legit way of generally evaluating our world? Isn't it where we must at least start? If evidence counters consensus, then it will change consensus. I think he's asking, will it change consensus? So,
yeah, I mean, obviously consensus is, I think a lot of times it's really helpful because, for the most part, a consensus, if it's truly achieved at a place of legitimacy, I mean, and, so taking away those outliers, that are out there. But we know that some of the greatest scientific discoveries came for those who kicked back against the consensus. And so for me, I'm definitely going to pay attention to the consensus. But I do like the last part of what he said, because we're talking about, is there evidence to believe otherwise? And I think that's where he really hit the nail on the head with what he said after his question, is because, I think that I mean, I don't know if you can start at any other place than the consensus. And so to some extent, I would definitely agree with it. But on the second part, I would say I want to be careful with consensus.
Yeah, and I think that's probably an area where you and I would probably agree. So a little bit more common ground there. When it comes to scientific consensus, I would say that it is useful for those who only have a layman understanding of the scientific principles that they're talking about. When we talk about the science of climate change, for example, I believe in climate change because I've studied the science of climate change. But if I didn't, and all I had to go on was the fact that 97% of climate scientists believe that climate change is real, that it's man-made, that the trends are showing that the Earth is warming, and only 3% weren't, I'm probably going to be more likely to believe in what the consensus is, because these are people who have actually studied it. But the fact that they've studied it and that they represent a consensus doesn't tell us anything about whether it's true. It just kind of gets us, it is a more reasonable place to start, and it's a reason to question the outliers. Why is it that only 3% of all of the world's climate scientists are against this idea and 97% are for it? That would cause you to want to dig a little bit deeper, and then that's when you start looking at the evidence. So for me, the thing that should convince is actually the evidence, not the fact that most of the people in the field agree with it.
Yeah, and sometimes I think that we have to ask, why do the 97% agree? What's leading them to this conclusion? Is it they think that this could be wrong, but this is how you get your research grant? So you have that kind of stuff.
Oz, the great and powerful, who's the executive producer of this show. Thanks for being in the chat, Oz. He has a super chat for $4.99. He wants to know if Paul having a dream counts as credible evidence. And I would elaborate on that, just to expand on his point. Is Paul having a vision of Jesus sufficient evidence to warrant someone else believing that Jesus was resurrected?
Okay. All right, two things. First, I'm going to go directly to his. Paul wasn't having a dream. Paul was walking down the road. Paul was awake. He was lucid. There's nothing to suggest he was having some kind of seizure or anything like that. Okay. Now, to answer more of your question, am I gonna, if I'm living in the first century, am I gonna take Paul, you saw this vision of Jesus, and so now I believe that Jesus resurrected? That would be enough to get me to believe, but what occurred after he claimed to see the resurrected Jesus would have been very convincing evidence. And so if you're familiar with the story of Paul, he was an up and comer, trained under the best teacher in Israel, and he was the number one persecutor of Christians. Going to Damascus with papers in hand to arrest these Christians, and then now all of a sudden he becomes arguably outside of Christ the greatest figure of Christianity. That doesn't seem that would be more to give me the evidence to say that this must be the case.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the only pushback I would have there is that might be good enough for a person living in that century who was witness to all the other things that happened, but nobody living today was. And so, but everyone living today who is a Christian is saying that all of that evidence is good enough for them to believe it, even though they haven't witnessed any of that stuff. So that's a disconnect for me too, because like, how can you say that, the fact that you have these claims from thousands of years ago that you haven't actually seen is good enough for you to believe that any of this ever happened?
Yeah, and to some extent, what you just described is the heart of the matter. Remember in John 20 when Thomas doesn't believe that Jesus is resurrected, and then Jesus appears before him. And then Thomas's response was, "My Lord and my God," literally translated, "Lord of me, God of me." And Jesus says, "Hey, blessed, you believe because you've seen me. Blessed are those who have not seen me and believe." And so, as far as what you said, a little bit of my pushback there would be, this is historical. I mean, are we going to believe the history of what happened? And I think that there's more evidence than just Paul. And so I do think that belief in Christianity is a cumulative case. I don't think that it's necessarily just like the one thing, if you will.
Yeah, I would say that the problem with cumulative cases is that people who offer cumulative cases, when you start going through the individual things that are supposed to be building the case, none of them stand on their own. And so it's like you're adding 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 and hoping to get to 14. But in reality, 0 plus 0 plus 0 is still 0, and so it doesn't actually build anything if none of those pieces of evidence can stand on their own. And I make this, Muslims make this argument to me and people of different denominations, but it's like the first argument you made doesn't seem strong enough to me. We have another super chat from Oz, so I have to read super chats because it's like free money.
Yes, do it.
Recognizing Oz says, "How do you know this to be true?" And it sounded like you made an argument because you quoted from the Doubting Thomas, where Jesus says, "You've seen me because you believe. Blessed are those who believe without seeing." Do you believe that? Do you think that there is a leap of faith when it comes to a lot of this, or?
First, before
have faith at all?
I'm sorry, you cut out.
Because Oz wants to know how you know all this to be true, and it sounds like you're saying we can't know for sure, but you're leaning that way because
I'll be honest. I mean, I can't say, do I 100% know that all of this is true? No. I mean, I don't think anybody can. I mean, just like it can't be 100% completely proven not to be true. It can't. I guess if like Jesus were to physically like come back and we could all talk to him, well, then that would solve it for all of us. Then we'd have something to deal with. But it does come to, and I don't like the word faith. I prefer to use what the word actually means in the Bible, and I hate that they translated it faith. Is trust. I trust what the Bible says because of the evidence that shows the Bible to be trustworthy. And that's kind of a little bit of what we got into, what we started to get into at the very beginning of the show.
Do you think that because we cannot be absolutely certain, people like me who are skeptics are justified in our skepticism, that there are reasons to be skepticism of some of the claims in the Bible?
Yes and no, and I hate to answer like that. Yes, in the sense that I think that it's okay for us to have doubt and to doubt some of the claims in the Bible. Because I'm going to be honest with you, some of the claims in the Bible, I mean, they're I mean, you're telling me that a snake spoke. You're telling me, you're telling me these things. That can be very difficult.
Magical things happen too. Not just the snake smoke, but that
a
staff turned into a snake, and
you have a number of the parting of the Red Sea, the lame being healed, the blind being able made to see, the deaf to talk, I mean, there's a lot there, but where I think that we have a responsibility, and this goes beyond the Bible. We have a responsibility to investigate and see if these claims are true or not. And so, I'm sorry, I just saw somebody else's question pop up as I was finishing the sentence.
I'll allow you to decide, how much in depth you want to go. I think you kind of answered that before. You sound like
I can kind of give you a bullet point on this one to answer that question about. I think what they were asking is the trustworthiness of the. Hang on just a second. For me, with the Bible, it's it goes into stuff like archaeology, prophecy, the geography. I mean, we could even drill down deeper into like the names fit appropriately to the time in which the scripture is written. I mean, there's a number of things. For me, I'm looking at the manuscript evidence, and the statistical evidence, the spectator evidence. These are some things. All right, I see Oz.
I would love to talk to you about the statistical evidence, but we don't have time for that on this show. We only have time for one more question, and it will be Oz's super chat for $4.89. Could you be wrong about all of this?
Absolutely. Okay. I could be wrong.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really big of you to say, because so many times I have conversations with theists of all varieties that they're absolutely sure that their interpretation is true, just as sure, they're all just as sure as each other, even though they're all sure of different things, and they insist that it is right, and everyone would know it's right if they just read it the way it's supposed to be read. And so I'm really happy, like, someone to be honest and admit that
and I don't want to disparage other people, but have I seen the resurrected Jesus? Well, no, I haven't. So I'm having to trust, and I've deemed the evidence that I have to be sufficient for me to believe that. And so, I mean, I personally don't think that it's intellectually honest to say I am 100% certain that all this is true. Now, I'm not gonna do something foolish like try to put a number to it, because that would just be made up anyway. But I would say I'm sufficiently convinced based on what I read in the Bible.
I appreciate your honesty, and I also appreciate your civility and willing to come.
You're welcome.
Show on an atheist network to talk to an atheist about what, kind of putting yourself in the hot seat. And I tend to push back a little bit, but that's just.
I love it. I thought you did a great job. I enjoyed being on here, and I enjoy your civility as well.
Absolutely. And for you, we actually haven't met before. This is the first time we're meeting.
Yeah.
I used to be a co-host on the old EA show.
Yeah.
We were in an episode of that, but I wasn't there that day, so we never actually had to have a conversation. So this is kind of the it coming full circle, so to speak. And I was about to end the show, Brady, but money just keeps coming in, and when money comes in, you just kind of have to milk it for all it. Hey,
I'll let you do that. I'll let you do it.
It's a compliment from Oz, the great and powerful.